Hello, I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and welcome to another edition of the EV Answer Man. This week we're going to discuss maintenance. Fairly common question after some of the most common ones that we've discussed previously, but maintenance is one that seems to come up quite often. And so we'll address that this week. And so what I've done is we're going to compare the typical electric conversion with a couple of common vehicles. One will be the Mazda Miata, and the other will be the classic Volkswagen air-cooled vehicle. Just to give you an idea of the maintenance requirements for the three different vehicles. And I've taken that information from the factory service manuals. So, factory service manual for the classic air-cooled VW and the factory manual for the Mazda Miata 2003 in this case. So, we'll take a closer look at what's required individually. And so first we'll start off with the Mazda Miata. Okay, now I didn't put down the frequency at which these things are supposed to be done. I'm just listing these are things that need to be done one time or another. Check the valve clearance. I happen to know that's at 60,000, every 60,000 miles. Timing belt replacement every 60,000 miles. The tension or tensioner needs to be inspected and replaced. Engine oil, they recommend every 7,500 miles. Oil filter, engine coolant, inspect the idle speed, inspect and replace the air cleaner, fuel lines and hoses, hoses and tubes for the emissions systems, spark plugs, brakes, steering, transmission, the rear differential, front ball joints, drive shaft dust boots, the exhaust system, and tires. Now I've put a little red dot by those that are the most frequent: the engine oil and filter, air cleaner, and the tires. Those are things that are done with the greatest frequency. The rest of them, depending on the miles that you drive, will determine how frequent you do them, but these are the things that are going to be done most often. Now let's take a look at the classic VW and see what is recommended for it. Alright, on the classic air-cooled VW engines, we've got valve clearance, that's every 3,000 miles. Ignition timing, typically done at the same time. Inspect the fan belt. Fan belt was really important on those because it turned the cooling fan and the generator, and if that belt broke, you weren't going very far. Those things would overheat rather quickly without that engine fan. Engine oil, lube the front axle. Not a lot of lube locations on the VW. On the early ones with the torsion bar front suspension, you had 4 Zerk fittings. Constant velocity joint boots. Of course, those are on the 69 and later that had constant velocity joints. You had boots on the swing axles up by the transaxle. Air filter. Again, they had probably one of the best air filters of any vehicle. The oil bath air filter. Excellent air filter. Wheel bearings, transaxle, fuel filter, spark plugs, brakes, steering, and tires. Now, as you can see, compared to the Mazda, this is a much higher maintenance vehicle. Look at how many more items require frequent maintenance. 60,000 mile valve inspection on the 03 Miata. That's the second generation, the 1.8 liter engine. On the earlier first generations with the 1.6, they had hydraulic lifters, no valve adjustment. But on the Volkswagen, every 3,000 miles. Of course, ignition timing, fan belt, engine oil, air filter, brakes, and tires. Brakes on the Volkswagen, they had four-wheel drum brakes, non-self-adjusting. That was a fairly common, as far as time goes, inspection and adjustment. That's why we typically, when we restore them, we'll put four-wheel discs on there. Not so much for the extra braking power, but for the lack of maintenance. By contrast, drum brakes have less resistance. And so if you want a vehicle that is going to have the least amount of rolling resistance, drum brakes are a good candidate there. You can adjust them so that they don't rub at all. Disc brakes always have some slight drag. So you can see the contrast there between the liquid-cooled and later model vehicle versus the air-cooled VW. But what about the electric vehicle? Let's take a look. All right, depending on the vehicle that you've chosen for your conversion, there will be some variable here. But lube. Not all cars require lubing. Some are, all their joints and so forth are permanently lubed, and that's not a maintenance item. Brakes, steering, transmission, rear differential or transaxle if it's a front-wheel drive car, ball joints, you always want to check the boots and so forth, same on any drive axles, and tires. And so with the Mazda we had 1, 2, 3 common things that are routine maintenance items. With the VW we had 7. With the electric car we have 1. And these are just items that are common to all of them. Now, to be fair, we have to add a few things on the electric that isn't pertinent to the others. And one of those would be, if you have a DC conversion, you'd want to inspect the brushes. We'll want to make sure that the brushes are wearing properly, and we want to blow off the commutator and blow air into the motor to blow out any build-up carbon dust. We don't want that to build up and cause any problem. So recommend that you do that, well, depends on the brushes you have and so forth. Keep an eye on it. You can usually see if there's dust coming out the fan end. It'll get a little dark around the screen. But 3,000 to 5,000 miles probably wouldn't be a bad rule of thumb. Better to do it and not to need to than to need to and not to do it. Other common thing that we want to do, and this is just, and you should be doing this with any vehicle, but there's particular things we're looking for on an electric vehicle, and that is we want to inspect electrical You want to inspect electrical connections. And so what I'm talking about is your interconnects with your batteries, the cables going to your motor and to your controller. All of those connections, specifically or especially the high voltage connections. We want to make sure we don't have any corrosion or loose connections, because if you do, that's going to lead to problems. That creates increased resistance. Increased resistance creates heat, and heat is going to cause you all sorts of problems. And so that's what you're really going to be looking for. Look for signs of corrosion. Look for signs of heat. You can notice heat, tall tale signs will be insulation or boots or your heat shrink or what do you have next to a connection. If it's starting to melt or look like it's disfiguring a little bit or anything, any sign to let you know that there might be an issue. And typically what we'll do, even, we do that fairly frequently, a visual inspection, but then we also go in with an insulated tool and check all the connections and make sure they're snug. And so when someone tells you that an electric vehicle is maintenance free, they don't know what they're talking about. We may not have as many items to do and as much work and expense. One thing about doing this, no expense, no expense. Oil change, air filters, so forth, coolant, all those kinds of things, expense, expense. So there's less maintenance expense, and there are less maintenance items, but it isn't maintenance free. And so, like anything, you want to be diligent and stay on top of things. Don't procrastinate. And if you see an issue, deal with it right away. So, things that are common to all of them. Not valve clearance, not timing belt, engine oil, engine coolant, idle speed, air cleaner, fuel lines, spark plugs, okay, brakes, steering, transmission, differential, ball joints, drive shaft, exhaust system, no, tires. So, when we go through and take out all the things that were specific only to the internal combustion vehicles, we can see that there's only a few things that remain. And that would be your tires, which you want to check regularly. That's probably the thing that you want to check as often as you do anything else. Come up with a maintenance schedule that matches your driving style. If you're driving 1,000 miles a week, you're going to want to do this much more frequently. If you're driving, 6,000 miles a year, not as frequently. And so just have your little routine where you do these common things. And so tires and brushes and the connections can all be done at the same time. The rest of these things are not going to be near as frequent. And if you have an AC conversion, you still want to inspect your brakes, but it'll be few and far between as far as replacement goes. The tire pressure is an important aspect of maintaining your electric vehicle. You always want to make sure that the tire pressure is correct to ensure that you don't have any greater rolling resistance than need be, as well as you'll get more mileage out of your tires. So if you keep an eye on the pressure setting of your vehicles, of your tires, you'll be in good shape. You'll find that good tires, they don't seem to vary much except for with the seasons. And then you'll find that they tend to drop a little pressure in the winter time, especially if you live in an area that you have hot summers and colder winters. You'll see a little more variation. But it's a good idea to inspect them, and the more frequent the better. Stay on top of it, but at least quarterly. While you got the air hose out, you should blow off the brushes, the commutator end, if you have a DC brushed motor. Let's take a look at the back of this Karmann Ghia. Well, on the Karmann Ghia, we do have an air filter, and so we want to check that and make sure it's clean. But we have a band over the commutator end of the motor here, and so we'll remove that every so often and check and make sure that our brushes are wearing properly, and then blow things out. And along those lines, we do just that, and we found that we had some unusual brush wear on this particular motor, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode, probably the next episode. And so we will discuss the brushes and go through a brush replacement. So once we've checked our tire pressure and blown out the carbon dust out of the motor, we can inspect our connections and make sure that everything is clean and not corroded. No signs of our insulation being subjected to heat. And then we also take a wrench and snug things just to make sure everything's nice and tight and we don't have any loose connections. But it's mostly a close visual inspection to make sure everything is as it should be, that we don't have anything rubbing against anything and causing wear. Just visual common sense. Okay, here's the brush, the commutator end of the motor. Kind of hard to see on camera, but we're looking, and we'll check all 8 brushes to make sure that they're all wearing the same, that there aren't any issues. And these all look very good. Vehicle has over 6,000 miles on it, and the brushes look absolutely brand new. All of our connections look good. And so, not a whole lot to deal with, but things that need attention nonetheless. For the EV Answer Man, I'm Richard, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Next week's Thanksgiving. We won't do an episode next week, so wish everyone a happy and healthy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.